In this installment of reading Cranford, chapters 7 and 8, there is a lot of gossip, which I had a bit of a kick out of. They even refer to themselves as, like in Cranford, being elderly spinsters or widows without children, and that they have to calm back a little bit with the judgment of all the new people, otherwise they won't have the society of Cranford anymore. And that made me giggle a little bit. But what I found really interesting was all of the description of the clothing in both 7 and 8, because they talk about brooches and pinning themselves into their dresses and the hats that they wear. And it was like very long descriptions too on page 115. Almost the entire last paragraph talks about the brooches and what different types, what's on them, what do they look like. And I myself am a fan of brooches. I have a few. And so I thought that was really interesting to see what they're have in their society, comparing them to what I have. And they're pretty similar for the most part, which, makes me feel like more of an old lady than I already do. But it is what it is, I guess. Also in chapter 7, another thing to relate to, how I think a lot of people feel, and the narrator talking about how they're hungry at this tea party. And I think it's an easy thing to relate to. Anyone can relate to that. Going to a party and not sure what to eat, when to eat. Don't want to seem like you're eating too much. But especially for what we consider female society problems, that it's still something that we deal with today, is not looking like you're eating too much in front of other people. And she makes mention to that of how it might be different in their house, what they'd eat, but here it's a certain amount of politeness of eating while being socially appropriate. In chapter 8, the gossip goes more so with the Lady Glenmire, and she gave me a bit of, I enjoyed her. I thought it also very interesting, how she's Scottish, and I wasn't expecting that at all until she spoke, and I was like, oh, now I'm reading this with a Scottish accent. All right. But I found it really interesting how offended the Cranford ladies were by not getting invited to meet her and see her until the very end, near the end of the chapter, where they finally are invited, and Miss Maddie goes, oh, no, I'm not going. And then they're all gossiping on whether or not they're going to go. And of course they all go. I mean, they all want to see her, but they're so offended to begin with that they weren't invited from the start, that it's like, this is back at you. I'm not accepting this. But it was interesting, and again, it talked about the clothing and how both what she wore, Lady Glenmire, and how it was pleasant to suspect that a peeress could be poor, and partly reconciled as to the fact that her husband had never sat in the House of Lords. But the fact that it makes him feel better that she might be poor because her dress, the lace, could be all of £10. That's something that, even in our society today, if you look at celebrities, we do the same thing, where we're like, oh, they can't afford it. That makes us feel better because we're all at the same playing field. Just because you have a higher title or status such as celebrities, doesn't mean that they're any better than us, but we only realize that when, in terms of money, for the most part, and what they can afford and what we can afford, and oh, we're going on these lavish vacations that whatever celebrity has, and so we're at that same level as them, but we're not, but it makes us feel like we are. And it continues with the clothing, much like in chapter 7, talking about all the brooches that they wear, that some of them wear 7 brooches and ridiculous things like that, and talking about the lace and the extreme situation of the cat eating the lace and then trying to figure all that out and what people wash the lace in. And that was really interesting to me because, again, that's like something that I myself am concerned with wearing. And so it's definitely made me feel old. But at the same time, it was refreshing because it's not something that people talk about right now, or different terms of jewelry, I guess, and clothing, but it was definitely interesting. The best part that I found, that like the funny quote at the very end of chapter 8 when Miss Maddie is talking about astronomy, not astrology, that she could never believe that the earth was moving constantly, because if she did believe that, she would be dizzy. It just like, it was so funny. It's like, oh, I choose not to believe in scientific fact because I'm gonna feel sick if I do believe it. Something that is so like common knowledge today that just goes, oh, no, whatever. It's funny. Again, the installments, I'm getting more used to it. Still feels like short stories, but at least all the characters are consistent, so I'm happy with that.